Hello, this is Courtney Riley, and this is my presentation on The Adventures of an IT Leader. This book is a fictional narrative about IT management and leadership. Our story follows new CIO Jim Barton as he steps into his new leadership position at his company. Jim is shocked by the promotion as he does not know a lot about IT and has never led a team devoted to IT. The book shows the many challenges and pitfalls that Jim falls into as he spends a tough first year learning about management and leadership. Part 1, The Hero Called to Action. Jim Barton is promoted to CIO even though he previously had no IT experience. The hero's call follows Barton as he learns some key things up front about IT leadership. First, that IT management is mainly about managing people. This put Barton at ease to realize that at his heart he was still a leader of people, and even without background in IT, he knew he could be successful. He knew he needed to study up, but that his lack of knowledge wouldn't completely deter him from doing his job. Barton also realized that he needed to get familiar with his new team. He needed to figure out their strengths and weaknesses so that he could use them appropriately. He also needed to assess what he himself did not know in order to be successful. Building relationships is vital in order to receive valuable input, feedback, and guidance from staff members. Some barriers that he had to his success were his own misconceptions about the role that he was stepping into, his lack of skills and competencies in this particular area, his failure to understand the role and importance that IT plays in the company at large, poor collaborations with the lines of business, other management within this company, lack of support from his own board and CEO, and insufficient authority on his own part. Some imperatives that he learned were to speak the language of business, to keep strong connections with the CEO and business peers, to manage his talent effectively, to remain efficient and understand the impact of IT on the revenue and cost sides of the income statement, and to enable an innovation in his department. Part 2, The Road of Trials. Thinking about cost, it's important to think about a few key things. Are the IT applications at the business an asset or an expense? Is the money being spent on IT assisting the growth of the company or detracting from it? Once those questions are answered, the manager must do the following. They need to determine the main purpose of allocating IT costs to other departments. They need to determine the appropriate percentage of the IT budget to spend on maintenance. And they need to determine how much the company should spend on IT. Then the value. It's not always simple to find quantitative levels that prove the value of IT in a company. There isn't a formula we can always work to show quantitatively how it works in a company. But it is imperative to determine the value of IT at your company and to determine the value a manager should place on it. So whether that happens with discussions between business partners, other managers, the CEO, as a manager, you need to find out where IT stands at your company and the value the company is placing in it. Management. So IT represents its own set of management problems. However, it is crucial to reevaluate the way projects are managed in IT. It's really hard to anticipate problems or needs in IT. The need to create prototypes, to have failures, which will lead to a successful prototype. So this is one thing the book talks about, is that because IT is always trying to get it right before they come out with a prototype, it's hard to anticipate a problem that prototype might have. So the book posits that it might be more beneficial to a company and in the long run save money even to come up with a lot of prototypes, find out the issues with those earlier on so that you can reach a more efficient prototype that works better quicker. Some of the priorities of IT: set a budget for IT and a person to control the budget. Create strategic goals and objectives for the department. Classify project types. Create an aggregate project plan and commit to specific projects. The key here is to get specific, create goals, and make sure you're working within a budget. Part 3, The Hero's Ordeal. So, thinking about Jim Barton and what he's undergoing and learning this year at his new company and his new position, He comes upon a problem. A data breach has compromised customer information with his department. So he comes up with a plan. He wants to identify the security that is in place and measures that need to be taken to reduce the risk of future attacks to the company. He also needs to establish what information to give the public about what has happened. He meets with his team and they come up with some multiple options for a decision, but they decide that the best course of action is to shut down major parts of the company for a period of 3 to 4 days so that critical systems can be rebuilt from development files while operations are run manually. The pros and cons of this. Pro, safest and the least costly option, and the con is that the option will be noticed by the public. The key here, though, is that no more security information, customer information is being leaked during this time, and they're able to rebuild and fix the problem. This is the option that Barton gives to his boss as their recommendation for what they need to do. His boss does not agree with the IT department's option, and he opts to keep the mistake a secret. There are a few people at the company who disagree, and he fires them. They raise ethical and moral obligations to this course of action. They believe it's the wrong decision. I believe it's the wrong decision. Transparency is always really important in maintaining trust between a company and the people who deal with that company. Barton also does not agree with his boss's course of action and does not think it is what's best for the company, but he is unsure of how to proceed. He doesn't know how he should go about making his voice known on this, and he ends up not ever sharing his concerns. But he does work on one thing. He puts an effective security strategy in place that also looks at consistent communication between his division and other divisions, so hopefully they can stop a breach like this from happening in the future. Part 4, the hero breaks through. Barton and his team determined the need to develop certain policies regarding social media and the other considerable safety factors that are at play here. The first policy idea is to have policy about specific issues of social media posts and other communication about what goes on inside the company that might leak and or create complications for the company. Policy number 2 is to define what constitutes helpful and legitimate use of those approaches inside the company. And policy ID number 3 is to identify emerging technologies that might be relevant to the company, but also so that those technologies do not blindside the company. The key with these policies is to have a stance, make sure the company knows the stance and knows the appropriate behaviors, and to make sure that they are well aware of any possible problems, issues that could arise with new developing technologies. They also come up with this idea of outsourcing. They canceled a contract with a specific company called NetEffects, but that doesn't matter. They canceled the contract and they decided that outsourcing would help create efficiency, better tactical support, and more strategic impact. So essentially, they'd have more control and less security issues with outsourcing. Some of these things. So some success components for this plan would be selective when determining what is sourced outside the company and what is retained in-house. Ensuring that joint business IT sponsorship for outsourcing instead of this happening on an island alone. Compare internal operations and look for hidden costs, so things like consulting or maintenance fees. Create a detailed contract, and studies have shown that the shorter contracts are more likely to be successful, so they need to limit the length of those contracts. This leads into standardization. A reawakened discussion of the business units and the reasonable distribution of IT expenditures brought about the notion of standardization, reducing infrastructure complexity, and possible outsourcing, which we just talked about. The infrastructure actively, unintentionally, worked against the ability of the IT department to be flexible, and what was one of the sources of this breach of information. So here's a breakdown of the infrastructure problem at Barton's company. Business managers would make their own decisions about what business systems, tools, and services they wanted to acquire and use. If they had the money in their budget, they would buy it with little to no input from the IT department, but then would turn around and expect IT to install and support whatever it was they bought. For instance, cell phones, mobile devices. Each manager or department had a different cell phone or mobile device company variety that they chose or preferred. So the IT department is essentially supporting multiple services on different vendor platforms all throughout just one company. Then they're blamed for problems that aren't really their fault, but they're problems that are caused by the service providers and vendors that these business managers are choosing without any input from them. Albeit this is a small example of the infrastructure's diversity and issues with standardization, but it also points to the potential issues with security. With so many different services being used, it's really hard for an IT department to maintain top levels of security for 4 to 5 different systems, and that's only with the cell phones or mobile phones. So take that and think about every single piece of tech in the company. If every manager is using something different, MacBook, Microsoft, different accounting programs, different softwares, it's extremely difficult to manage. So this need for standardization here is so that everyone can get on the same page and agree to some sort of procedure, process for standards of what kind of tech we're going to use and buy and allow in our company. Innovation, creativity in individual people and in the organization. There are a couple steps to this. The first step is blind variation. So random changes to past ideas to create new ideas, new variants. Then that leads you into step 2, selective retention. So you look at the new ideas, the new variants, and you decide which ones look or are valuable to your company, and you take those and use them. So the big takeaways with innovation here is that don't get trapped into thinking that one model that has worked in the past is the best and only way to tackle a project. If a manager becomes too attached to a model, they struggle to deal with change or with new situations. What a manager thinks they know could be useful now, but may not be useful in the future. We only know things at a point in time and must continually add to our toolkit of models that work in order to pull from to respond to situations as they come up. And of course, there will always be situations that come up that none of our models will work, and that's why innovation is so important. Constantly reevaluating, constantly coming up with new ideas, better ways of doing things. And part 5, the master of 2 worlds. So managing risk is really important with IT. How do you manage risk? So you determine potential risks and then you categorize them. Some risks may be worth it, whereas other risks may need to be protected to the fullest extent. You may be willing to take the risk in a certain area to free up some money or space to be fully protected in another. Then determine how to protect the data in a company. How will it be grouped? At what level will each data be protected? Or if you do it at the minute data level, the book points out it takes more time up front, but over the long run you save money because you're not misappropriating and allocating full extent protection to things that don't necessarily need it. So the book argues it's best to do it at the smallest data level instead of to do big groups that may miss some things. So our story ends with our hero, Jim Barton, having gone through all of this, navigated the breach, tasked his workers with, standardization, assessing the risks, creating new ways of doing things, new protocols put in place to ensure the safety of the customer's information, and to ultimately bring their IT department, the value of it, to the forefront of the company. He is asked by the end of this by 2 different companies to come and work for them, and they'd both be a step up from where he is now. His reputation has preceded him as a man who does the right thing and will do his best to honor that where he works. So a recap. Here's what Barton has learned. That management is management. It's important to manage people's skills and talents, and there are certain problems you can and cannot anticipate when managing. Communication. Always tell your boss the bad news first. Tell them as soon as it's a possibility. And effectively communicating IT-related business issues to business managers requires systematic effort. There needs to be a procedure in place, just like everything else you try to accomplish in business. Spend sufficient time on it. Harness the power of new technologies. Don't let it be this big, bad, scary thing that we can't use and we can't work. Learn about them. Manage your vendors. Talent's needed to monitor those contracts. Beware of the lone genius. Know who's best in show. Know the strengths of your team. Know your insufficiencies. Buy smarts, not hours. Explore the use of IT for innovation. And ultimately, have integrity and do the right thing. Thank you.